So today's topic, there we go. Today's topic is ensuring your insurance will cover you and your family in case of a natural disaster. You know, we just had Hurricane Ian come and hit us, and not necessarily hit us here where I am, but you know, the people in Florida. The Hurricane Ian killed 110 people so far. And that's they haven't had that many deaths from a single hurricane since Katrina back in 2007, 2008, 2010, whenever that was. So that was a pretty big natural disaster. There was 110 people. They're estimating somewhere between 60 and $75 billion in insurable damage, insured damage. So making sure that you're properly covered for those natural disasters that come and happen is key. So let's see here. Come on. There we go. Oh, look, it's me. So when we talk about natural disasters, we're talking about earthquakes, tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, wildfires, landslides, extreme temperature. It's actually kind of crazy. I was looking up some statistics the other day. Extreme temperature kills more people than on an annual basis than most other natural disasters. So, you know, stuff like people losing their power quite regularly in the Mideast with those ice storms. People go without power for a week before they get power restored. So that's stuff to think about. One of the keys for your insurance is to know your coverage, right? I know that we like anybody that's talked to me has or has listened to me, like this comes up almost every time. Is know your coverage. You know, as much as your agent should be working to help you mitigate your risks, it's still your responsibility. And as an agent, I'm still going to do what you tell me to do, right? So I'm going to tell you, hey, the best practice for the industry is to do this. But if you decide that you want to do this, or you decide you want to do this, that's what we're going to go with. Yeah, Chris, what's up?
Yeah, a quick question.
No, definitely. Ask away.
It's I guess in regards to hurricane.
Yes.
I've seen like on some quotes it says, you know, name storm included or name storm excluded. So my question is that, you know, I had one recently that said, you know, coverage for wind and hail.
Yeah.
And I specifically asked, does that include name storm? And they said yes. So
Okay.
I guess my question to you is, and I got that in writing, is if it's not there, or it doesn't say specifically excluded, can we assume that name storms are included in our coverage?
Yes. If it doesn't specifically say in your policy that it is excluded, then it should be included, as long as there's not some, you know, fine print somewhere saying name storms are excluded from your policy.
I mean, that would concern me if it's buried, you know, somewhere in a 30-page document that, you know, so it's, I mean, do you know if they're required to put that like on the deck page or anything like that?
No, it is not required to be on the deck page. It is, so there in your policy, there's a section that's exclusions. All of the exclusions are inside of that section. I would definitely, there's two sections in your policy, the exclusions and the coverages. Make sure to read through those really well, because every policy is different, right? And every company is different. And even the same company on different properties, your policies will be different. So it's really important to read through your policies and make sure that you are covering what you want to cover. Some people, you know, they're going to say, I don't need wind and hail. Guess what? Wind and hail doesn't cover flood. So if the water that comes into your house is not driven in by wind, it's not covered. Meaning if the water level rises from a storm surge, from groundwater, from a rogue wave, from anything, if any water from outside gets into your house that's not driven in by wind and you don't have flood coverage, that's not covered. Your insurance won't pay for it. So, you know, those are the types of things that you have to take into consideration when you look at that. So most homeowner policies exclude losses from landslides, earthquakes, power failures, war, government action, faulty zoning, inadequate maintenance, poor workmanships, and some water damage. Like I said, if it comes in over the ground and you don't have flood coverage, you're kind of SOL.
Aaron?
Wind and water may be damaged, may be covered
Aaron?
in most regions. Yes, Brendan.
What would faulty zoning be? What would an example of faulty zoning be?
Okay, so faulty zoning is going to be, say you have a property that is zoned R1, R2 residential, right? And you have a third unit in there, or a fourth unit, or you have a garage on the back and it's not properly zoned. Your insurance can choose to deny a claim on that property because your property is not properly zoned. And then they also have there's also some exclusions that come in with I can't remember the wording for it, but it has to do with your local municipalities either changing your zoning, because they can do that, or they what is it when they take your land? There's
Eminent domain.
eminent domain. There we go. Thank you so much, Leah. Yeah, eminent domain, that kind of stuff is not covered under your insurance. So that's usually what they're talking about with zoning issues.
I believe it's called theft.
Well, yeah. That's a good conversation to have right there. So we'll move on from that. Wind and water damage. Okay, so the wind and water may be covered in most regions, but areas prone to hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and earthquakes most of the time. So your Gulf states, your southern Texases, your Louisianas, your Georgias, Florida, most insurance policies exclude wind and hail unless you specifically add it. And then none of them include flood, right? So if you are, and just because you're not in a flood zone doesn't mean that you're not going to get flooded. I went to a FEMA training, you know, and FEMA is really good about we're going to scare the bejesus out of you and so that you buy their insurance. But 98% of so 98% of the counties in the United States have all had floods in the last 10 years. On top of that, the amount, so floods come in, if we have a wildfire, your flood, you are it's something like 80% more likely to have a flood in the area where you had a wildfire, flood and landslides, because the scarring on the earth kind of hardens it and it doesn't let the water soak in. And so because of that, you're more prone to get flooding in wildfire areas. And in the last 30 years, so 30 years ago, in the early 90s, the average amount of wildfires, acres burned annually was around 2 million acres. In 2020, it was over 10 million acres in the US burned from wildfires. So those are things to keep in mind, that just because you're not in a flood zone doesn't mean that you're not going to get flooded. Literally, flood maps, house on south side of the road is in a flood zone, house on north side of the road is not in a flood zone and not required to have flood insurance. But what do you think the chances are that if house on south side of the road gets flooded, the house on the north side of the road doesn't get flooded? It's probably pretty low, probably pretty high that the house on the north side of the road is going to get flooded as well. There was one other thing with that, but I can't remember right now, so it's fine. If it comes up in my mind, I'll remember it and speak it. But policies often have a limit liability to a maximum of $300,000. That's pretty common. There's a lot of carriers that can bump it up to $500,000 in liability on just the property inside the property policy. So, you know, it may be worth looking into umbrella policies depending on how many properties you have. And yeah, Paul. So the $300,000 liability limit would be, if you feel like you need more coverage than that, umbrella is a really cheap and efficient way of upping your liability coverage. Umbrellas on the cheap end, they can be as little as like $200 for $1 million in coverage, in excess coverage. Umbrella policies, to answer that question for you, Paul, there's 3 companies that we use. Most of them you cannot get on your own, meaning you need to go through an agent. But there's 3 companies: Personal Umbrella, USLI, and RLI, I believe, are the three main ones that we use. But Allstate has an umbrella policy, Nationwide has an umbrella policy, Liberty Mutual has an umbrella policy, State Farm has an umbrella policy, Farmers has an umbrella. Almost every national carrier has an umbrella. Some of them require you to have some or all of your covered properties with them for the umbrella to cover it. Some of them don't. Some of them will let you have a standalone umbrella with their company. Stillwater is one of the nationals that will allow you to have a standalone umbrella. Most of those limit to 5 or 8 houses. Okay. Yeah. So they do. Everybody has different rules for their umbrella. And so I think that we put, okay. So one thing to remember with umbrellas is the more policies that you attach to your umbrella, the more expensive your umbrella is. So we did a quote the other day for a gentleman, and he had 22 properties or something like that. And the quote on his umbrella was $5,000 a year. I think it was either a $5 or a $10 million umbrella. But that umbrella covered all of his properties. It was 20 something properties. So some carriers do limit the amount of policies that you can attach to the umbrella. Some don't. It depends on the carrier. And then another thing, when you're looking at your homeowner's policies, does your coverage include additional living expenses, right? In the case of natural disaster, you know, you get displaced. I don't know what the number is of people displaced from Hurricane Ian, but it's very big. And so some of them are going to have additional living expenses and some of them aren't. And so one of the things on your personal homeowner stuff, it's a cheap add-on to make sure that you have additional living expenses in case you need to find a rental or something while your primary residence is getting rebuilt. Common myths: FEMA will save you. FEMA won't save you. FEMA has a cap on how much money they will give you. So in the case of like a natural disaster, a hurricane, a tornado coming through, FEMA has a cap on how much they will give you. And most of the time, all it does is pay to clean it up. It doesn't pay for repairs, and it doesn't cover additional living expenses. Your landlord policies will cover lost rent as long as that is included in your landlord policies. Some people don't want to pay, you know, the dollars a month that it costs to have lost rent in their landlord policies. And so if a tenant ends up having to move out of one of your properties because it got hurt, whether you do or don't have lost rent, that's a big kicker for you guys. So definitely, you know, my suggestion is if you own a property that's anywhere even close to an area that's prone to natural disasters, I would definitely make sure to have lost rent in your coverage. Water damage is not all the same. Like I said, you've got wind driven, you've got sewer backup. If the sewer backs up into your home, most homeowner policies do not cover that. So that's something to think about. Clean water, like if you have a water line break inside of your house, that will usually be covered under a standard homeowner's landlord policy. But if you have a water line in your front lawn break and it gets water into the house, that's not covered because that's outside water, and they won't cover it unless you have flood insurance. Wind-driven rain, that's supposed to say not. Wind-driven rain is not considered flooding. Wind-driven rain is covered under your wind and hail coverage. So that's one of the reasons why tornadoes are so much easier to cover than than flooding. Brendan, what is going on with insurance in Florida? I would love to answer that question, Brendan. Florida insurance sucks, basically. So there's two things here with all of your property casualties. Almost everyone is going to see a 10 to 15% increase in your premiums in 2023 across the board, every state. Florida is a special case. All of these insurance carriers that are still in the state, they're having losses year after year after year, and so they're having to cover off on those losses. I've seen jumps higher than 75%, like you're saying, and probably in the last year there have been 17 carriers leave or become insolvent in the state of Florida. 17 carriers. Right now, I don't have a carrier that will one, there's a moratorium on homeowners and auto insurance in Florida, which means that no one will write insurance unless it is a new policy on a new purchase. If you are wanting to change insurance, if you're wanting to mix things up or anything like that, you cannot get a policy right now. No one will write it. Not even Citizen. Citizen is the state-owned insurance carrier. Like they're literally owned by the state of Florida. They are not writing any homeowners or landlord policies right now. And we're trying to get into Florida. I have a couple outside resources for Florida. Brendan, if you want to shoot me an email, I would love to hook you up with those agencies, or anybody that's got any properties in Florida. Go ahead and shoot me an email, and I'll see if I can get you guys hooked up with the agents that we have over there. So thank you, Liz, for posting that. Paul, two of your companies left the state. So Georgia, okay, just to give you guys a little bit here, Georgia, in Georgia, Allstate, one of the largest nationwide carriers, Allstate, just asked the commissioner of insurance for a 70% increase on auto insurance. Okay, so that means that they might get it, they might not. They have to be, so every insurance carrier has to be approved for the amount of increase that they want to increase your rates in each state. And the commissioner of insurance in each state can approve or deny, or send back a counter offer. You're not going to get 70% this year, but we'll give you 50, right? And when that happens, they do a 50% increase across the board for everybody who has Allstate in the state of Georgia. So that's something that we're definitely seeing. And if you're only getting a 10% increase for 2023, you're one of the lucky ones. And you probably have properties in a low risk state like Ohio, or in the Utah, Idaho, Nevada. California is an extremely high risk state. That's so Florida, Louisiana, Georgia, is it North Carolina or New Jersey? I don't remember which one. I think it might be North Carolina, and California are the 5 worst states for property casualty insurance right now. They just have so many claims, and they have so many, like the carriers they're trying to stay solvent. It's essentially what's going on. They have either too much business or not enough, and they're just having too many losses inside of that state. And then the fifth common miss is loss income is covered in your business owner policy. So those of you that are business owners that have active businesses, not every business owner policy has loss of income. Paul, they didn't have good reinsurance. So they do, but what happens is you can only reinsure things so many times. When you have in a case, so this Hurricane Ian just barely happened. One of the largest dollar cost in the last 10 years. So your insurance carrier's loss on that is going to be in the high $60 billion range, meaning that even with good reinsurance, these companies aren't designed to lose $60 billion in a year. And so they have to spread out that expense, and that expense comes back onto us, the people who are buying insurance, the people who are buying, homeowners, landlord, auto, and everything like that. Lloyd's and Swiss. So everybody uses Lloyd's and Swiss for reinsurance, but there's still only so far that they'll go. And Lloyd's and Swiss are extremely expensive. If any of you guys use proper insurance for your landlord stuff, you'll know proper is very expensive. They're a good company to work with. Their claims processing, their customer service is really great, but they underwrite most of their stuff through Lloyd's. And because of that, they are 40 to 60% more expensive for the same policy across the board. So I want to transition one step here, because this is we're talking, we're almost out of time actually. So we're gonna just do one. Basically, we'll just open this up for questions. You know, you never know what's going to happen. So if you can cover yourself off with some life insurance, it's super cheap. It's super cheap for what you get. It's worth it all day long, right? Term, whole life, permanent. Well, we call it permanent life, because whole life is different from index, from like universal life or whatever. So, oh, they got mixed up in orders. One of the key things to do if for your homeowner stuff, make sure to have an inventory of your personal belongings, especially high value items, to make sure that that gets put on your insurance. Sometimes you may need to have things appraised so that they can be put on your insurance. But like with jewelry, if it's not in your policy as a line item, coverage only goes up to about $1,000 on most policies. So why don't we go ahead and open this up to some conversation? If anybody has any other questions or anything that I can, you know, maybe give some answers for. Yeah, we'll do that. No questions?
Isn't it also a good idea to, I mean, I've heard, you know, take your phone and kind of videotape your whole house of all your belongings. Therefore, you know, you've got another record of it too, just for yourself and frankly for the insurance.
Yeah. The more documentation that you have, if you need to go in and make a claim, the better off you're going to be, especially if you're working with carriers that have a high denial. If they deny a lot of claims, having good documentation, good record keeping, that's very, very important. So somehow it got mixed up a little bit. That's okay. So if nobody else has any questions, we can just quickly go through these last two slides. We'll just talk a second on permanent life insurance. So, you know, everybody knows the things: permanent life insurance, commercial policies covering multiple properties. What are the pros and cons? Okay. So multiple properties on a single policy. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. There are some carriers that if you have multiple properties on a single policy, they will look at having a claim. If they have a claim on one of those properties, they view it as a claim on all of the properties. So instead of just isolating it to just the one, they raise the premium on your whole policy. And so you will need to be really careful with that. Sometimes it makes sense to bundle properties together. It's usually when it's when you get more properties. The more properties that you get, the more cost effective it is to bundle properties together onto a single property, onto a single policy. But there are those carriers that will make a claim against one, a claim against all. So you want to watch out for that. Allison, how does your company handle multiple properties on one LLC? So usually we still, like I was saying about Brendan's question, as long as it's not too many properties, we still will take and put them into a single, each property into an individual policy. It keeps some separation between them. and it allows for a little bit more versatility, because, you know, maybe Safeco is the most economical policy in state X, whereas Allstate or Pacific Northwest or ASI or some other company is more economical in another state, right? Each company has kind of its grouping of states where it likes to place business at any given time. And remember, property casualty insurance is very cyclical, meaning Allstate may be the cheapest today, but in 5 years, they're going to be the most expensive, and you need to switch policies to State Farm, to Nationwide, to somebody else, right? So every year it goes like this. And then in 10 years, Allstate may be the cheapest again, right? So that's why we constantly go out and shop the carriers. How can you find out which companies have high rate of denial? So that's really easy. There's a website called AM Best. There's a company. It's called AM Best. Alpha, I don't know what M is. It's the letter before N. Alpha M Best. And they rate every insurance carrier in the US. And in-house, we don't work with any carriers that have below an A rating because their claim denials are too high. They're too much of a pain in the butt to work with. And while they may be cheaper, their policies suck. So it's not always about price. Yeah, so I think that I answered all those questions. Does anybody have anything else that they want to go over real quick before we need to close out here? John Scott, if I want to use a portion of a self-directed IRA, do I need an LLC? So that's not a question that I'm going to be able to answer for you, John. You're going to need to talk to one of the, thank you, Liz, self-directed IRA stuff. There's somebody else in house that'll handle that. So my expertise is insurance, and that's kind of, you know, where I try to stay in my lane. So awesome. Well, I appreciate everybody's time today and all the conversation that we were able to have. Like I said, if anybody has any questions about anything, please feel free to reach out to me. Send me an email or phone call. I'm not always great at picking up the phone, but if you leave me a voicemail, I will get back to you. So, yeah, hopefully everybody has a fantastic day.